Right, sometimes even the financial news can be heartbreaking, and this is one of those times. A new study suggests that COVID-19 forced almost half of small businesses in South Africa to shut down. Financial services firm FinFind has produced a new report about how small, medium and micro businesses were impacted by the lockdown. To discuss, we're joined by the CEO of Finland, Darlene Menzies. Ms. Menzies, you must have known it would be bad, or more than bad, devastating. But were the findings even worse than you imagined?
Francis, yes, I think that definitely was the case. We expected, as you say, it to be quite devastating result in terms of how many businesses were forced to close, but 42.7% was really staggering. And when you have a look at the unemployment figures that go along with not only those businesses that closed, but those that remained open and had to, shed jobs, both full-time and part-time jobs, I think it really is a difficult picture for the country, and a lot needed to do next year.
When you say closed, what exactly do you mean? Does that mean closed for good, sort of shutting down the shop, or temporarily in some cases? Because we know if you had a restaurant or beauty parlor in the hard lockdown, you had to close in a sense.
Yep. No, we're talking about liquidations. Those businesses that, expenses and their liabilities outweighed any of their reserves or their assets, and actually had to completely close the business down, deregister the business, and hopefully in some time some of those will be able to start up again. We're not talking about close the doors during the lockdown period. About 60% of businesses were unable to trade, had to close in that sense over the 5 months of the lockdown. But 43% of them actually closed for good and shut shop, as it were.
So 43% wiped out by the lockdown. And like you say, they could restart, but we don't know how much of that is happening right now.
Yeah, well, the study that we did was a 5-month study. So from the beginning of lockdown level 5 up until about August month end. So a study that had a look at, obviously some of the stats in the beginning we thought would be bad because of, the lockdown level 5 and causing all trade to stop. But over the period and the months following that, we were amazed to see how few businesses had cash reserves to last them more than a month, let alone 3 or 4 months. And a lot of them had taken on debt prior to COVID just because of where the economy was at the time. And so with the debt that they'd already taken on and no cash reserves, it didn't leave a lot of runway for them to continue.
So that made the difference, money in the bank, that buffer. What sort of businesses were hardest hit?
So, as you said originally, the entertainment industry, restaurants, tourism, travel type businesses. But the reality is that if you look at the study, construction businesses, manufacturing businesses, everyone had their own idiosyncrasies around where their premises were when they couldn't trade. But the study looked at businesses across every sector, across every province and every size business. So it's a real sort of cross section of the whole SME sector in South Africa when you have a look at the figures in terms of closures. And again, as I say, 60% of jobs, permanent jobs lost, 76% of part-time jobs, and SMEs were taking on 53% less casual labourers. So if we just look at the sample we had, which was about 1,500 businesses that were polled, of which 43% closed, that took into account the 60% was 4,600 jobs lost just in those 1,500 businesses. So extrapolate that out over the generalization of the SME community in the country. Then you look at those 2 million jobs that they spoke about recently that were lost. Most of them were in the SME sector, and that's where the real fuel of the economy is.
And so sad. Remember the NDP, the great plan for the economy, spoke about small businesses being the solution to unemployment in the future, being these engines of job creation. Certainly that's not happening. And something very worrying in your report, you say that a lot of these businesses had applied for relief funds. So there were these efforts to sort of lend a lifeline to these businesses, but they were rejected. Why?
So when you have a look of those businesses that closed, about about half of them applied for funding, and 99.9% of those funding applications were rejected. In the case of the businesses that remained open, also about half of them applied, and they had about an 81% rejection rate. So the amount of money that was set aside, whether by government or banks, just never found its way to SMEs. And you ask why that is the case. There are some real instances of businesses that were already overextended as far as debt was concerned. But really, when you look at the way banks and government are scoring SMEs at the moment, it's really a one-size-fits-all. They look at a small business the same way they do a big business, and the chances of SMEs actually accessing funding in the country at the moment are very dismal. So prior to even COVID, that was something that really was being addressed. We need to look at small businesses in a different way when we fund them. For instance, I'll give you a quick example. Banks look at whether the owner has a bad credit record, but they don't look at the business's repayment history to see its credit worthiness. These are old type of models that are being used that need to now be revamped in order to make sure we can get the lifeline to these small businesses and see many more jobs coming back to the unemployed.
And you say that the businesses that survive not planning to create jobs in any meaningful fashion in the near future. What can we do as citizens? I guess support small businesses where you can.
Absolutely. I think that's the big cry, is support small businesses in every way, and be intentional about the way, during this period, anybody, going out to buy gifts, but just generally where you buy from. Just even in bigger businesses, supporting small businesses in their supply chain. I think we need to get away from the tick box exercises and the kind of lip service. And big business really need to start to dig deep when it comes to supporting small business, because if they don't, they're not actually going to have the consumers to be buying their own goods, because those will be the unemployed people of the SME sector. But let me just say this, Francis, it wasn't all doom and gloom. About 75% of those businesses that remained open had a really sort of positive outlook for 2021. Of course, they are entrepreneurs, so they are, they're born optimists and perseverers. But 32% said that they would take on new staff next year. So this is what we need to look out for, and we need to support the sector. It's the lifeblood of the country.
Yeah, hopefully they thrive. Thank you so much. Very sad research, but let's see what happens in future. The CEO of Finland, Darlene Menzies.